No backup, no rescue, no second chances. Out there in the Rockies, a man lived or died by knowledge that never made it into any textbook. The mountain men weren't just trappers and traders. They were masters of survival techniques so advanced, so brutal, and so effective that they've been forgotten by history. They needed methods that worked when everything else failed. They needed secrets that could save a life when death was minutes away. They needed knowledge that separated the living from the frozen corpses scattered across the wilderness. Every technique mattered. One forgotten trick, one missed detail, and a man could starve, freeze, or disappear forever into the endless mountains. The men who survived decades in the wilderness knew things that would shock modern survivalists. Things that history books couldn't print. Things that were too raw, too brutal, too real for civilized society. But what were these hidden survival secrets that kept mountain men alive for months without resupply? Which forgotten techniques could mean the difference between life and death in extreme conditions? And why were these methods deliberately erased from historical records? Today, we're uncovering the survival secrets that mountain men took to their graves, knowledge that could save your life in the modern wilderness. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. Between 1810 and 1840, fewer than 3,000 mountain men worked the American wilderness. Of those, less than half survived more than 5 years. The men who lasted weren't just tough, they possessed survival knowledge that had been refined through trial, error, and death. These weren't the romanticized techniques found in history books. These were brutal, practical methods that worked when everything else failed. 1. The Maggot medicine protocol. When a mountain man suffered a deep wound in the wilderness, infection meant death. But the survivors knew a secret that would horrify modern medicine. They deliberately introduced maggots into infected wounds. This wasn't desperation, it was advanced medical knowledge. Certain species of fly larvae would only eat dead, infected tissue while leaving healthy flesh untouched. Mountain men learned to identify the right type of flies and would capture them near fresh kills. They'd place the larvae directly into infected wounds, then cover the area with wet moss or cloth. The maggots would consume all the infected tissue within days, leaving a clean wound that could heal naturally. This technique, now called maggot debridement therapy, is used in modern hospitals for severe infections, but mountain men discovered it through pure survival necessity. They also learned to use specific plants to attract the right flies. Certain wildflowers and rotting vegetation would draw flies that produced medical-grade larvae. This knowledge required understanding insect behavior, plant identification, and wound care, a combination that took years to master. The psychological aspect was crucial. A man had to overcome his revulsion and trust the process, while maggots literally ate his flesh. Many mountain men died because they couldn't handle the mental stress of this treatment, even though it would have saved their lives. This technique was never recorded in official medical texts because it was considered too barbaric for civilized society. But for mountain men, it was the difference between life and death when gangrene set in hundreds of miles from any doctor. 2. The hypothermia revival technique. When a mountain man found a companion near death from hypothermia, standard warming methods often failed. The survivors knew a brutal technique that could bring a man back from the edge of death, but it required precise timing and nerves of steel. The method involved controlled rewarming using body heat and specific positioning. The rescuer would strip both himself and the victim, then lie skin to skin in a specific configuration that maximized heat transfer to vital organs. But the critical element was the breathing technique. The rescuer would breathe directly into the victim's mouth and nose, not just to provide oxygen, but to warm the airways and core temperature. This had to be done in precise intervals. Too fast and the victim's heart could stop from thermal shock. Too slow and brain damage would occur. Mountain men also learned to massage specific pressure points that would stimulate circulation without causing dangerous heart rhythms. They knew exactly where to apply pressure on the neck, wrists, and ankles to restart blood flow to extremities. The positioning was crucial. The victim had to be placed at a specific angle that prevented blood from pooling while allowing the heart to pump effectively. This knowledge came from watching men die and learning what worked through brutal trial and error. This technique saved countless lives, but was never documented because it involved nudity and intimate contact that Victorian society couldn't accept. Modern hypothermia treatment uses similar principles, but mountain men developed these methods through pure survival instinct. 3. The Starvation Cannibalism Code. When food ran out in the wilderness, mountain men faced the ultimate survival decision. But they had developed a systematic approach to cannibalism that maximized nutrition while minimizing disease risk, knowledge that was deliberately erased from historical records. The code wasn't about random consumption. Mountain men knew which parts of the human body provided the most nutrition and which were safest to eat. They understood that certain organs contained concentrated vitamins that could prevent scurvy and other deficiency diseases. They developed specific preparation methods that reduced the risk of disease transmission. This included proper cooking temperatures, which parts to avoid completely, and how to preserve human flesh for extended periods. This knowledge was based on understanding anatomy, nutrition, and food safety. The psychological protocols were equally important. Mountain men created rituals and mental frameworks that allowed them to consume human flesh without losing their sanity. They understood that survival cannibalism required specific mental preparation to avoid permanent psychological damage. They also established rules about whose body could be consumed and under what circumstances. These weren't arbitrary decisions. They were based on practical considerations about disease risk, social dynamics, and group survival. This knowledge was never recorded because it was considered too horrific for civilized society. But for mountain men trapped in winter storms or lost in the wilderness, it was the difference between survival and death. Modern survival experts acknowledge that cannibalism may be necessary in extreme situations, but the systematic knowledge that mountain men possessed has been lost. 4. The pain suppression system. Mountain men regularly endured injuries that would incapacitate modern people. They developed a comprehensive pain management system using natural substances and mental techniques that allowed them to function with severe injuries. The pharmacological component involved specific plant combinations that provided powerful pain relief. Willow bark for inflammation, wild mint for muscle relaxation, and certain mushrooms for severe pain. But the key was knowing the exact dosages and combinations that provided relief without causing dangerous side effects. They also used physical techniques that redirected pain signals, specific pressure points, breathing patterns, and movement sequences that could reduce pain perception. These methods were based on understanding how the nervous system processed pain signals. The mental component was equally important. Mountain men developed meditation and visualization techniques that allowed them to function despite severe pain. They could mentally compartmentalize pain, focusing their consciousness away from injured areas while maintaining full functionality. They also learned to use cold, heat, and pressure in specific combinations that could temporarily shut down pain receptors. This knowledge required understanding anatomy, physiology, and the interaction between different sensory inputs. This system allowed mountain men to continue working with broken bones, severe cuts, and other injuries that would normally be debilitating. The knowledge was passed down through apprenticeship, but was never formally recorded because it involved substances and techniques that were considered dangerous or primitive by medical authorities. 5. The Predator Deception Protocol. Mountain men lived in constant danger from bears, wolves, and mountain lions. They developed sophisticated deception techniques that could fool predators into avoiding human contact, methods that went far beyond simple noisemaking or fire. The scent masking system was incredibly complex. Mountain men knew how to use specific animal urines, plant extracts, and mineral compounds to disguise human scent completely. They could make themselves smell like other predators, prey animals, or even inanimate objects. They also understood predator psychology and behavior patterns. They knew how to move, position themselves, and time their activities to avoid triggering predatory responses. This included understanding territorial boundaries, feeding schedules, and seasonal behavior changes. The vocal deception techniques were equally sophisticated. Mountain men could mimic the sounds of various animals to confuse or redirect predators. They knew which sounds would cause predators to investigate, which would make them flee, and which would make them ignore human presence entirely. They also developed visual deception methods, specific clothing patterns, movement techniques, and positioning that could make a human appear to be a different type of animal or an inanimate object. This knowledge required understanding predator vision, depth perception, and movement detection. The psychological component involved understanding predator decision-making processes. Mountain men knew how to present themselves as either too dangerous to attack or not worth the energy expenditure. This required precise control of body language, positioning, and timing. These techniques were never formally recorded because they were considered too specialized and dangerous for general use. But for mountain men living in predator territory, they were essential survival skills that could mean the difference between life and death. 6. The weather prediction system. Mountain men could predict weather changes days in advance using techniques that were more accurate than modern meteorology in many situations. Their system combined multiple environmental indicators that provided precise short-term forecasting. The biological indicators were incredibly sophisticated. They observed specific insect behaviors, bird migration patterns, and animal activity levels that predicted weather changes. They knew which animals became more active before storms and which ones sought shelter in advance of temperature drops. Plant behavior provided another layer of information. Certain flowers would close before pressure changes, specific trees would change their leaf orientation before wind shifts, and various plants would alter their scent production before precipitation. The atmospheric indicators required understanding subtle changes in air pressure, humidity, and temperature that preceded major weather events. Mountain men could feel these changes in their bodies and interpret them accurately. They also used celestial observations that went beyond simple sky watching. They understood how moon phases, star visibility, and atmospheric clarity related to upcoming weather patterns. This knowledge required years of observation and correlation. The geological indicators included understanding how rock formations, water sources, and soil conditions changed before weather events. They could read the landscape like a weather map, identifying microclimates and local weather patterns. This system allowed mountain men to seek shelter, prepare for storms, and plan their movements with remarkable accuracy. The knowledge was passed down through oral tradition but was never formally documented because it was considered folk wisdom rather than scientific knowledge. 7. The emergency shelter construction. When caught in sudden storms, mountain men could construct life-saving shelters in minutes using techniques that maximized insulation and protection with minimal materials. These weren't the basic lean-tos found in survival manuals. These were sophisticated structures that could keep a man alive in deadly conditions. The foundation system involved understanding ground insulation, drainage, and heat retention. Mountain men knew how to select sites that provided natural wind protection while avoiding areas where cold air would pool. They could identify ground conditions that would stay dry and provide insulation. The structural techniques used specific lashing methods, support systems, and material arrangements that created maximum strength with minimal resources. They understood load distribution, wind resistance, and thermal dynamics in ways that modern engineers would recognize. The insulation system was incredibly sophisticated. They knew how to layer different materials to create dead air spaces that trapped body heat. They understood which natural materials provided the best insulation and how to arrange them for maximum effectiveness. The ventilation component was crucial. These shelters had to provide protection while preventing carbon dioxide buildup and condensation. Mountain men knew how to create airflow systems that maintained oxygen levels while retaining heat. The camouflage aspect was equally important. These shelters had to be invisible to hostile humans and animals while providing complete protection. This required understanding visual concealment, scent masking, and sound dampening. These construction techniques could mean the difference between survival and death in emergency situations. The knowledge was passed down through hands-on training, but was never formally documented because it was considered basic woodcraft rather than advanced engineering. 8. The Water Purification Protocol. Mountain men had access to water sources that would kill modern people within hours. They developed purification techniques that went far beyond boiling, methods that could make any water source safe to drink using only natural materials. The filtration system used specific combinations of sand, charcoal, and plant materials that removed both physical contaminants and biological threats. They knew which plants had natural antibiotic properties and how to incorporate them into filtration systems. The chemical treatment involved understanding which natural substances could neutralize specific toxins and pathogens. Certain tree barks, mineral deposits, and plant extracts could treat different types of water contamination. The biological treatment used beneficial bacteria and natural processes to break down harmful organisms. Mountain men knew how to cultivate helpful microorganisms that would consume dangerous pathogens while leaving the water safe to drink. The testing protocols were equally sophisticated. They could identify contaminated water through smell, taste, color, and other indicators. They knew which signs indicated specific types of contamination and which treatment methods would be most effective. The storage techniques ensured that purified water remained safe for extended periods. They understood how to prevent recontamination and how to maintain water quality during transport and storage. This knowledge allowed mountain men to survive in areas where water sources were naturally contaminated or had been polluted by mining, animal activity, or other factors. The techniques were passed down through practical training, but were never formally documented because they were considered common knowledge rather than specialized skills. 9. The Psychological Survival Framework. The mental challenges of wilderness survival were often more dangerous than physical threats. Mountain men developed psychological techniques that prevented madness, depression, and panic in extreme isolation and stress. The routine establishment system created mental anchors that maintained psychological stability during extended isolation. They knew how to structure their days, weeks, and months to prevent mental deterioration while maintaining motivation and purpose. The stress management techniques involved specific mental exercises, breathing patterns, and physical activities that could reduce anxiety and panic in life-threatening situations. They understood how to maintain clear thinking under extreme stress. The isolation coping methods addressed the psychological challenges of extended solitude. Mountain men knew how to maintain social connections through imagination, ritual, and symbolic activities that prevented complete mental isolation. The fear management system taught men how to function effectively despite constant danger. They learned to process fear as useful information rather than paralyzing emotion, allowing them to make rational decisions in terrifying situations. The motivation maintenance techniques kept men focused on survival goals during extended hardships. They knew how to maintain hope, purpose, and determination even when facing seemingly impossible odds. These psychological tools were often more important than physical survival skills. A man could have all the technical knowledge in the world, but without mental resilience, he would die from panic, depression, or poor decision-making. This knowledge was passed down through mentorship, but was never formally documented because psychological concepts weren't well understood or accepted in that era. 10. The Injury Treatment System. Mountain men regularly suffered injuries that would require modern emergency rooms, but they had developed treatment protocols that could handle everything from broken bones to severe lacerations using only natural materials. The wound cleaning system went far beyond simple washing. They knew which plant extracts had antibiotic properties, which minerals could prevent infection, and how to create sterile environments using natural materials. They understood wound irrigation, debris removal, and infection prevention. The bone-setting techniques allowed them to treat fractures and dislocations without modern equipment. They knew how to create splints, traction systems, and immobilization devices using natural materials. They understood anatomy well enough to reset bones and restore function. The suturing methods used natural materials to close wounds effectively. They knew which plant fibers, animal sinews, and other materials could be used for stitching. They understood tension, healing rates, and scar formation. The pain management during treatment involved natural anesthetics and distraction techniques that allowed them to perform painful procedures. They knew which plants could provide local numbing and which techniques could reduce pain perception during treatment. The rehabilitation protocols ensured that treated injuries healed properly and regained full function. They understood physical therapy, exercise progression, and recovery timelines that maximized healing outcomes. This medical knowledge allowed mountain men to recover from injuries that would be permanently disabling without proper treatment. The techniques were passed down through apprenticeship but were never formally documented because they were considered folk medicine rather than legitimate medical practice. These hidden survival secrets represent knowledge that was too brutal, too specialized, or too controversial for polite society. But for the mountain men who lived and died by them, they were the difference between survival and becoming another forgotten casualty of the wilderness. In our modern world of comfort and safety, these techniques remind us of the incredible adaptability and resilience of the human spirit when pushed to its absolute limits. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America.